police station, man. Don't give people dirty looks. They're working on it. Okay. Greetings, everybody. We will call this meeting of the Policy and Finance Committee to order. And the first thing on our agenda is discussion and possible action. A charter ordinance amending charter ordinances codified at Topeka Municipal Code A2 through 26, A2 through 30, and A2 through 55, all concerning council meetings, agendas, and readings. So who wants to start? Mr. Mayor?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. As you know, I proposed this early on and for consideration by the council. There are really two changes that this makes in our current process. The first, if you all have copies there in front of you, lines 23 and 24 is the change there. At the present time, the council meetings are scheduled for a 2-year span of time, and this just changes it back, so we make the schedule 1 year at a time, which makes sense because we have to sometimes, it's hard to make a schedule 2 years in advance. The other subject change is on page 3, which is really lines 53, 54, 55. At the current time, it states that every proposed ordinary ordinance shall be read by title in open council meeting 2 times before final passage. I feel that that is not a good way to convey the agenda in the future. As you know from experience, we generally have from 0 to 2 or 3 ordinances that meet the criteria to be read. None of the resolutions are read. Many of the financial provisions are read. So it is my recommendation, my request, that the committee would approve passing this to the council for approval. If I would, and actually this would take it out of the charter that we have to have the first readings. Then the council could, in its own rules and regulations, set a process by which we inform the public and those interested of what the agenda is. As you know, I greatly appreciate the fact that through the city manager and the city clerk, we are now sending out the agendas like almost 2 weeks in advance with all attachments. So in the general public, they are available electronically that far in advance already. If the council feels it also would be helpful to have it read a week in advance or tell what's on the agenda, I think it could be done in a much better manner by having someone, city manager, the city clerk, someone just say, on next week's agenda is these 5 items, and perhaps give some background if there's going to be a significant item that will require a great deal of discussion, something in this manner. Just having it in a more relaxed process than what we do at the present time.
Do we have any questions for the mayor? Councilwoman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Larry, I'm looking at the council rules, which I really was not aware of, until this all came up. And can we make any of these changes without changing ordinances, but to do it by the rules and procedures?
Yes, I would
Mary.
call it legal. Can we, how do we change the rules and regulations?
Oh, the purpose of council rules is to fill in the gaps. Essentially, they're similar to regulations under state law and KARs. But once these ordinances are approved, then we will modify the council rules to fill in the gaps.
But my question is, can we do some of the things that Larry wants to do without having to make the ordinances? Can we do it with just the rules?
Oh, no, we cannot. No, we would have to amend the charter ordinance first.
Okay.
So if I may, the charter ordinance in terms of a hierarchy is above the council rules.
Oh,
The
yes.
council rules come below that.
Yes.
And so any change that we made to the
Yeah.
council rules would have to agree with
It's
the
like
charter ordinance.
regulations to
You're correct.
laws, yeah.
Okay.
And just then, if we, in other words, if these changes are adopted and this requirement is no longer in the charter, then through council rules, we can state that the agenda can be described each meeting prior to set up the process for doing that, and the vote to do that is a simple majority, correct?
To change the resolutions,
Or
to change the
rules.
council rules, yes, it would be a majority vote.
Okay.
The council rules would address what the agenda is going to look like.
And I think that gets back to your question. I mean, the rules can be changed easily in a sense if there's 5 votes. We can change the rules.
Mhm.
And that's what I think would be the best thing to go toward. Councils change rather than having this set, we're locked into this, and maybe in 2 years or 4 years, we want to do it differently. And then we can just change the rules and do it differently rather than go through the charter.
A follow-up question. What I'm hearing from constituents and getting phone calls about is the first readings issue. How can we leave that so that there is something where it is read, that it's going to be read, it's not going to be announced, that the issue is going to be read in so that the public has an opportunity to sign up to testify, to come to a hearing. If we strike the language that you're recommending, how can we get first readings or something that is like first readings? Because I know you made the comment that a lot of other cities do not have first readings. How would we assure the public that they would have the opportunity to come and present on an issue?
Be my suggestion that we would adopt that in our rules, the rules of the council, rules and regulations, which state, it'd be a rule of, and perhaps this committee could write it or make the recommendation, that how we give a brief overview of next week's agenda, something like that. We will always have an overview of next week's agenda, and in that they could point out if there's certain things that are of more importance than others, call people's attention to, or something like that.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, bear with me here. We currently, the practice that we have, and I think you mentioned a little bit in your statement, only reads the ordinances that are going to be proposed. But that's the only thing that's covered under first readings is the ordinances, correct?
And that's that language there. Every proposed ordinary ordinance, which doesn't mean all ordinances.
And so the argument could be made that the current practice is not transparent.
Yes,
Because
certainly.
there are several things that come up in the course of business for the council that is not read the week prior, being it a financial issue, what was the other, a resolution.
All resolutions.
Yeah.
And I think the example I gave a couple of weeks ago, there was one time we had no first readings. And the next week, we had an agenda that was like 3 pages long.
Yeah.
And most of those were resolutions.
Where'd it come from?
So, so we're not being transparent in the present practice.
I would agree with that. And I think it was a surprise to me as we sat down at council on Tuesday night, and I always pull up the agenda on the website, and I already had the preliminary agenda on the website for the 17th, for next week's council meeting this week, which even for us as council members, we never see those agendas until they're posted to the public as well. I mean, we might see a preliminary the week before, but to have it available online, we've already taken a step forward in having it more. How soon are we putting those on there now, city manager?
The preliminary agenda is going on the 2 weeks before, like.
Okay,
They go the Thursday previous, so not the next Tuesday, but the following Tuesday has it that Thursday. So
And-
you're about 12 days in advance, 13 days in advance.
and when do we start that practice?
About 3 weeks ago was the first one.
Okay, great.
So, can I make a clarification? This is just to get it out there. If you defined transparency as only being represented by a first reading, we wouldn't be transparent. The mayor said, we're not being transparent what we're doing. I think we're being very transparent what we're doing. If you're defining achieving transparency through first readings, then you could make that statement.
Yeah,
But
I would
I believe
agree.
we're being very transparent in everything that we're doing.
Yeah, and I think that's the number one concern that I've heard from constituents is that they're worried that we're going to lose something by removing first readings. And I think my understanding of this is that we actually will increase how we're communicating. And the issue becomes, do we codify what the clerk needs to state at each meeting so that we get the highlights of the following week's meetings, or the following week's meeting, rather than just the ordinances that we know are gonna happen, which is all we're currently getting.
And Mr. Chair, thank you. I think the answer there is whether it, I'm assuming this is a rules issue, that we would put it in the council rules that the city manager would cause to happen, that in the preliminary agenda time, we would actually provide all of the background information, understanding that sometimes we would have placeholders or documents would change just because we're not often, we are occasionally working on documents up until the last posting date. But our commitment is to do that, and we talked about just starting it right away to demonstrate that it can work, and I think that it's been fairly well received up to this point, but it's only been a couple of weeks.
Yeah. Are there any other questions for the mayor? Does anybody have anything else they'd like to present or explain on this issue? What is the body's pleasure?
Mr. Chair, I still have one question as to what, you know, when you look at the ordinance, Mayor Waldes, you go. In your words, what are you trying to accomplish, or what it is that we need to be doing differently to change what we're doing now? I think my question is, what do we want to accomplish?
Well, I think what we want to accomplish is, as the city manager said, if the council members feel it is important, and as you hear from your constituents, that we say verbally in a meeting what is going to be on next week's agenda. The process we use now is not good, and it's locked in the charter. And when anything's in the charter, you know, it's the highest level. Well, I think this is an item that, first of all, we take out of the charter, and we move it down here, and we get something that works better, like was just described. Maybe we have we could be codified. It could be in the rules saying, at the end of each meeting, we have a brief description of what is on next week's agenda. And again, most cities don't do this just because we're in an electronic world and they don't. And we had the city clerk called around, and many cities didn't even know what a first reading was because they don't do this. So it is something that is from the past. The legislature does it in some fashion. But certainly if people feel that it's important, that's good. But let's find a better way to do it than what it is now.
Is there a possibility that we could get copies of, you know, say 3 cities the size of Topeka, or maybe even look at Wichita, Olathe, and another city to see exactly how they have it in their ordinances, or if they have it in their rules, you know, just just to compare to see what we're doing with, what else is going on in Kansas.
If I may, you just asked about motivation, and I'm gonna make the assumption that your motivation is paired with the next item on our agenda, is to streamline our process.
Right, yes.
So that it's less cumbersome, and fits better the times, I guess, would be the best way to put it.
Yeah, I think, and we have the rules and regulations. There are some of those that the legal department has suggested that we should change, because we don't follow them in the sense that we do council's change. I think the important thing is to make our council meeting as effective, efficient as we can be. And the council should determine that, not a charter that was written 20 years ago that says you do it this way. We can change it, and in 10 years, the new councils at that time may change it again as the needs change. And that's what I think is important, that we're flexible.
One follow-up, Mayor Wolgast, would you entertain the idea that we put our documents that we're gonna have at the meetings available online? I know I was talking to Susie yesterday about the documents we had in the transient guest tax meeting. And in addition to the agenda, that any documents that were gonna be shared with the council or the committee members, that, that would also help in aiding the public in understanding what we were dealing with. Because, for example, just like today,
She means we're live.
okay.
Oh. I thought she was excited to see you.
Just like today, when I went on the public events calendar and saw what was on the agenda, if I was a private citizen, it would not have meant anything to me what it said. But if it had the attached documents, much like what we have with the council meeting and the agenda and the attachments and everything are right there. I mean, you can go online and see what's there. So if we are gonna get high-techy here, that would be good to share those documents.
And I think that's to the city manager, his role in how those things are disseminated. Can speak to that.
Mr. Chair? Council member, if I could just seek clarification, you're talking about the attachments that would go along with an agenda item. And that's,
Or a committee meeting.
or committee,
Or
yeah.
committee meeting,
And
yeah.
that's our commitment, is that we're starting that process and understanding that sometimes a document might be done, but even if it's not done, we need to at least put in a placeholder or a most complete document possible, indicating that it's a draft still. But the idea is to get it all done by the time that you post 13 days in advance, so people are well informed. So that's our objective, to do that.
Well, I think, one thing that I would mention is that the concerns that I've heard is that folks don't have the internet at home. So therefore they can't access to get the information that they're looking to get, so they rely upon the television and watching the council meeting to hear what's coming up, what the first reading is. I can speak from my own personal life. I don't have cable, so I don't have access to the TV channel. But I do have the internet, so I can watch it live streaming if I wanted to. So I mean, there really are two sides of that coin. It's not a matter of who has access to a television, because if you don't have cable, then and you don't have the internet, well, you have no access except to call the county clerk's office and say what's going to be on the agenda. So, and there are many ways, from my perspective, to be able to get this information. It's whether or not the citizen is motivated enough to want to go out there and get it. And so, I mean, I don't see that we're putting up any roadblocks for access of data. What we're just trying to do here is streamline the process a little bit. Does the body have, what's the body's pleasure? No pleasure? Councilwoman?
I think just in light of the conversation, I think it makes sense to remove the requirement from the charter ordinance, because as the mayor stated, it makes it so difficult for changes. But if we move to adopt, which I think maybe I would be willing to move to adopt, I think the companion to that would be asking legal to perhaps put together a proposal for our council rules to have what we've, put it into words, what we've talked about in the sense of, at the end of the meeting, a discussion of the upcoming agenda. And that would cover, that way, those, which is a legitimate concern for those people who do get it from an audible, either from the TV or some fashion that way, then they'll still get it. It just may not be that it's in our charter ordinance anymore.
So I could just ask
City
to,
Attorney?
thank you. I just asked to clarify that it would be moved to adopt this, but you want to see a draft of what the council rules would look like, that would give a brief overview, or whatever other changes would need to happen in the council rules to make it as transparent as possible.
Yeah, that would be the motion that I would like to make. That way, there isn't concern immediately out there that what we have sent out of this committee is somehow not going to address the concern about first readings. So we're doing both. We're saying that this is a reasonable approach to remove it from the charter ordinance, but we want to see the language of how we will incorporate it into our rules so that it's still there. Then that's my motion.
No, so
Okay, any discussion?
if we could also have, not part of the motion, but as I indicated, because the council has to approve all this. I mean, it's just gonna approve the committee report, and then it goes on to first reading, right? But I would like to see that 3 cities, Olathe, Wichita, maybe Orland Park, see what they do as far as their agendas and how they meet and how often they meet. I know there was some discussion about having the first Tuesday meeting be the action meeting, the second Tuesday being the work session, the third being the action, and that way you always have that time to let the public know what's going to be on the agenda. And I think what this does is to take it out of, quote, the ordinance piece and put it in the rules piece, and that's actually better.
And I know that we had provided several, or the mayor's office had provided several different cities and what they do, but we can provide that again.
The language.
Yeah.
Is everybody finished? My request would be for the mayor's office to work with legal to craft those rules that come forward. Because that was going to be my suggestion, but you made it, thank you. Was that we have the rules set up already there when we have this discussion to show we're going to change the charter, but we're going to shift it into the rules, which is easier for us to be able to accomplish. And so getting that kind of laid out and straightened out, I think if the mayor's office could work with the legal department, that would be great. And then the council, I think, will have a better understanding of why this happened or what the intention is, and the public will also have a better understanding. So any further discussion? So the motion on the table is to pass out favorably with the caveat of having the proposed rules change be attached with the new information once it passes on to the council. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes 3-0. Next item on the agenda, discussion and possible action, an ordinance amending the City of Topeka Code 2.15.020 through 2.150.040, 2.15.070, 2.15080, 3.55060, 5.20.080, and 5.55.120 concerning meetings of the City Council. And Mr. Mayor, did you want to speak to this issue?
Thank you. And perhaps I should introduce to the committee my shirt, in case you didn't see. Kansas League of Municipalities, I was at that meeting this morning. And there, the policy board members get the privilege of wearing similar shirts at certain times, certain meetings. So one of the perks of that particular entity. On this ordinance, there's one major change and then some minor issues. On line 18, front page, you see at the present time it says that the council shall meet in the chambers for the first 4 Tuesdays of each month at 6 p.m. for the purpose of conducting the business of the city. And it is our recommendation that we take out the 4 and and make it 3, so that the council would meet the first 3 Tuesdays of the month. If there is a need, the meetings, there could be a 4th meeting, as there is right, at the present time. The other minor changes is, at the present time, our meetings are defined as being many times an official meeting, or the other term, or we say we have regular meetings, we have official meetings. And in a sense, that also is restrictive, because we have then the set agenda, and it makes it so we can't really move things around. We would take those 2 words out so that we have council meetings. And the council can determine what is in that meeting. We can have a hearing, we could have a discussion like this last week. We had in the work session, the presentation on the North Topeka East program for their use of the SORT funds. That could have been handled in an actual meeting. The other item is that also we have included in this is taking off the cover sheet when we have items added to the agenda. Typically, it's a very short point that's usually prepared in the city council office. It's been questioned if that's necessary, because typically, 85–90% of the things we add is usually a noise exception. And it's just another piece of paper that we're providing that uses a 1-page ordinance that we have. And we just say if any item can be added to the council with the majority vote of the council. We can add items, and it can be and other items that council members would want to bring up. So I think the significant point is, first of all, changing from 4 to 3 meetings per month, and basically the majority of first-class cities of Kansas, none of them have 4 meetings. The majority have 2 or 3. You have seen in the last couple of months, we have had a number of meetings that have been 30 minutes. And if we had perhaps less restrictions, we could have more of the presentations during those meetings. And I think there was discussion when this was first brought up, well, what are you going to do about this? How are we going to have these meetings? I think that's up for the council to determine, and perhaps in this committee. We can work out, what do you want the agenda to be? It's been suggested we put, the major items first for having a hearing, or the items that are simple to take care of, and it could be discussion items. So that it's a user-friendly meeting, not tightly restricted on what we handle and how we handle it. And it's up to the council to determine how best the use of the time is.
Any questions for the mayor? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'm just waiting on you.
Mayor Wolgast, if we had the 3 meetings a month, and I think I mentioned this earlier, based on, if you have a meeting one week and next week you have a work session, and then my concern is we sometimes have work sessions and we don't get our work done. We have to go right into a meeting. And you lose a lot of that information,
Right.
if you wait to talk about it at another time. So would this give you the flexibility then that you could have a meeting that's an action meeting, and then a meeting that's a work session meeting, and more input maybe from the public at that point?
Yes, I think, and this speaks to that very point. I think one of the process we have now of the work session is 5:15 to 6 o'clock, and at 6 o'clock, the meeting has to be gaveled. And which really doesn't make sense, because we cut things off, we hurry. Rather, those presentations could be during the council meeting, and rather than having them in a work session. And I know, maybe the city manager would speak, because he also certainly plays a major role in the setting of the agenda. How that is handled, I think, I think last Tuesday night is an example where, you know, and the doors were shut, and then at whatever, 2 minutes till 6, we open them up, and everyone is coming in, and I have to admit, we did not start the meeting at 6 o'clock. We waited until 6:01. People were still coming in, and we're not very user-friendly. Why don't we just wait and not have them come up that period of time, and then we're organized? You know, we had a presentation. They couldn't get organized because they couldn't even get in and find each other. So I think let's find a way to be a little bit more open and welcoming to the public. And I think getting away from those things, now, that's not speaking to this amendment. That's not speaking to the ordinance. But that's some of the long-term things I think we could bring about if this ordinance would be passed.
I would concur. We have a system that works now, but it is disjointed often. And we do have the option of going into a post-session at the close of the meeting if we didn't get something done. But often the string is lost, and there's a level of fatigue often at the end of, not always, but at the end of several council meetings. So the idea here is that it would provide additional flexibility, and we have the ability to control the flow of the agenda and the flexibility of the agenda through council rules and practice.
I had one follow-up question. I've noticed, and I watched Jetto last night at our council meetings, oftentimes the 4 minutes that people speak is not enough. And last night you were having to make so many adjustments and extensions, and it takes time to do that. I would like to know what other cities, when there's public comment, is it a 4-minute rule, and the last minute is you're notified that your time's almost up? But I would like to know if citizen input or comment is, if that 4-minute rule is standard, or if we can do something about that so that we're not always having to extend it.
That's in our rules and procedures. And so that could be changed at any time. We could find out what other cities do,
Okay.
what the trend is, and then it's just a matter of, again, of five votes, and change it in one meeting.
Okay.
And I think on Jetto specifically, it's in the Jetto rules
Right.
for 4 hours,
Yeah.
but
It'd be nice to know what other cities are doing with that public comment piece.
If I may.
yeah, go ahead.
Mr. Chair. Yeah, that is an issue that brings up some legal issues in terms of council meetings are a place of traditional public debate, and the public needs that ability to address the council. I know cities all across the state handle it differently. You can't say that this is the rule for every city, but as was stated, it's an issue that we can look at in our council rules, and it can be changed. As long as we allow the public that ability to address us, to address you, address the governing body and the city manager, in a way that allows them to express their opinions.
Any other questions? One thing that I will just point out, and I was kind of doing some math, like we scheduled this meeting, I think until 4, so that would be 2 to 4. So if I added up all of the time that I spent this week in meetings that were part of my job on the governing body, I've spent 8.5 hours. I know yesterday you were in meetings prior to the Jetto meeting, so I know the councilman standing here in the corner was in that meeting, but then also came to the Jetto meeting, so probably spent about 6 hours in meetings last night. So the argument is that the council meeting, from my perspective, is obviously very important, but it's not the only thing that we do every week. There are lots of other parts of our job that aren't as restrictive in terms of the rules and how they have to function, but they still are a part of our job if we're gonna participate and be involved in every level of the city government. And so, I mean, I have absolutely no problem spending 8.5 hours a week. I don't think anybody else has that problem, but giving us the flexibility of working with the council meeting and being able to adjust the times, and if we need a fourth meeting, then we schedule a fourth meeting. But after I watched week after week of basically nothing on the council agenda, just because that's where we were at, why are we there? It could have waited another week to approve the expenditures. It could have waited another week to do the first readings. So it makes sense to me to free up some of our time from my perspective, because we can better serve our constituents if we have that time freed up. But then the reverse of it is it's a cost saving measure, because every time we have a council meeting, we are paying people to be in that building. And so that would roll back some of the costs that we're expending to have 4 council meetings versus having 3. I can't imagine that it's an astronomical figure, but it's still money, and it's the taxpayers' dollars. So I think it's a better way for us to conserve what we're always trying to take care of, and that's the taxpayers' money. So what is the body's pleasure?
I'll move to adopt the changes.
Motion to adopt, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, any further discussion? So the motion before us is to move, to pass forward favorably the changes to the number of council meetings that we will have. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Motion passes 3-0. Item number 3, discussion and possible action of discussion and possible action, an ordinance amending City of Topeka Code 9.05.080 concerning adoption of the 2013 Uniform Public Offense Code.
Go ahead. Thank
City
you, Mr.
Attorney.
Chair, thank you. I think it was November 12th, the November 12th meeting that we first looked at this. The Uniform Public Offense Code is the code that is produced by the League of Kansas Municipalities that governs misdemeanor offenses essentially within the city. And to cut to the chase, I guess, one of the changes this year versus last year they left out of the UPOC section 10.1.1A5 that governs the transportation of a loaded firearm in a vehicle. And then they put that back in this year. So if we would adopt the UPOC without amending out of section 10.1.1A5, it would make it illegal to transport a loaded firearm within a vehicle. And I want to give just briefly, very briefly, background on the reason we put this in front of the governing body was transparency. Because there are cities across the United States that have just adopted the UPOC, not realizing that there's a change from one year to the next year. So we had prepared a memorandum that I provided again today during the council meeting that outlines what that section is. And then it was brought to this body from the council to decide if they wanted to continue to amend out of that section, not amend out of that section, how we wanted to move forward. So I know there's been a lot of discussion, a lot of input. I've spoken to several members of the community, spoken to Mr. McIntosh, who's in attendance today, and several other people that were concerned about this. And again, the chief and I had long discussions, and the chief of prosecution and I had long discussions, and we believed that the best thing, the most transparent thing we could do is put this in front of the councils and the governing body. So there was no surprises, because the last thing anybody wants to have happen is 2 months from now, there's an arrest, there's an issue in the governing body, because the UPOC is not, a 2-page document. It's pretty thick, that 2 months from now, the governing body realizes this section was in there and it wasn't brought to your attention. So I know the chief, myself, the chief of prosecution wanted to bring that to your attention. It was referred to this body to decide what type of action they wanted to take in reference to the UPOC and how we wanted to move forward from here.
And the chief may be able to answer this. I think at some point, and it was before my time on the council, there were some changes that were made that had some impact to firearms, and then they had to go back and fix those. Do you recall that?
I think that might have been before my time.
I can address, there's been a number of issues with firearms in municipalities that have been changed. I don't want to say annually, but pretty often as it relates to open carry, concealed carry, there was some legislation, I want to say it was approximately 2.5 years ago, governing open carry on public property, and whether or not a municipality could essentially ban the open carry on public property. And there was actually some proposed, Overland Park was involved with some litigation for a little while, and the Attorney General's opinion was no, that we couldn't govern the open carry of firearms on public property. So there have been a lot of issues as it comes to transporting firearms and openly or concealed and where you can do it, so.
So if I could just clarify it a little bit for my own edification. Right now I can open carry a loaded firearm as long as I'm not in a vehicle. But once I enter my vehicle, I have to unload the firearm and put it into a container of some sort.
If the governing body adopted the UPOC without amending out of section 10.1.1,
As it is.
yes,
Okay.
then that would be a correct statement.
And if I'm a concealed carry licensee,
There's an exception. There's 9 exceptions under 10.1. Concealed carry is one of those exceptions. There's also exceptions for law enforcement officers, I think people in the military. So there are different exceptions, and one of those is concealed carry.
and one of them is hunting, am I?
Yes,
Okay.
somebody without hunting license.
If they have a loaded rifle, then,
Yes.
okay. Chief, do you have anything to add? Okay. Does anybody else, Earl, please come to the podium. State your name for us.
My name's Johnny Jackson. I'm against this because there's no reason to have open carry in public when you can't have it in your car. We went out to eat Thanksgiving to a restaurant. 2 different people in there had guns strapped on their side, but yet I can't have one in my car. And it's just not right. Because, and 2, you give a law enforcement permission to go to a bar, drink, get drunk, carry their gun. That's illegal. They can't do that legally. And I'll give you an example. A few years ago, we was down in Texas to visit my wife's boy. 2 cars in front of us. We couldn't figure out what was going on. There was 3 people outside on the sidewalk with a stoplight. They was yelling and noise and all this. They tried to hijack the guy's car. He had a gun, because in Texas you can carry a gun 24 hours a day. He shot all 3 of them. And if he hadn't had the gun, he'd been dead, because they had guns. And I think that we got the right to protect ourselves. You know, if somebody comes up to me and wants to take my car, they're gonna get shot. I might get shot, but they're gonna get shot too. And I just don't think it's right. Because you can go anywhere in town, carry an open gun on your side. The county, I've been around guns since I was 5 years old. In the county, my whole life I grew up, you carry a loaded gun. But handgun, you have to be 21 years old. But shotgun rifle, you can carry them all over loaded. And I just don't think it's right, because people, you know, the cops can't protect everybody. And I think we got a right to protect ourselves.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Is there any questions for Mr. Jackson? No? Any other comments? Mr. McIntosh?
Earl McIntosh, I'm also against banning loaded firearms in vehicles by law-abiding citizens. And I want to thank the city, the chief of police, the council, for bringing this to the public's attention and being transparent. I'm very grateful for the city for being transparent, above board, and listening to the community and what they have to say about this issue. And I want to note that again, that, you know, the city's the one that brought this up, it being transparent. We've talked about transparency earlier. Now, House Bill 2111 is already before the legislature, and that bill attempts to unify or make standard laws for carrying cars. And that's what's out there. And if we make the ordinance the same as it was last year, then the city wouldn't have to waste time and money in the future by bringing this back up if House Bill 2111 passes. So I just wanted to bring that up. Thank you for your time. If any questions,
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Earl.
you're welcome.
You know, we got a lot of emails on this issue, and, as Chad said, that some cities adopt it and don't even know that it's in there.
That is correct.
So, one of the concerns was that people wouldn't even know that it was against the law, and you'd have law breakers coming into the city and not knowing they were breaking the law.
That is correct.
So that was one of the issues, that it was, you know, something that we, I mean, what do you do? Put a sign at the, you know, where you come in the city that you can't, there's a ban on loaded weapons in a vehicle, so.
Right.
Is there any other issue that, I mean, I know we've got just piles of emails on this, but is there any other issue that you felt was really relevant as to, I know we talked about putting a baggie, you know, taking the bullets out, putting them in a baggie that would be called encasing and.
Right, the way the law is written is very vague, and so I had a concern that the criminals, they're watching, they know, and they're not gonna follow the law to begin with. And if they're pulled over by a law enforcement, they're gonna quickly unload their firearm and throw it in that sandwich baggie. And so, thus, really, you know, hand tying the law enforcement that comes over there and pulls them over. So, that's about it. I totally agree with the community not knowing that this law is in place. And that's what 2111 at the state level does, is it lets everybody know one rule statewide. So it's beneficial for not only law-abiding citizens, but law enforcement as well. We can have this discussion. We need uniformity to start the discussion. Without uniformity, the discussion gets out of hand, and it's not, you know, we have so many different opinions. So, you know, that's what I believe the legislature is going to focus on this year, is uniformity, and that's the best for law enforcement and for law-abiding citizens. Any other questions? Thank you.
Any questions?
It's not a question, Mr. Chair, but I would like to propose an amendment, since what's before us is the Uniform Public Offense Code, if I may. I would like to propose to amend to reinsert section 3.1.1, which is the domestic battery. If we're going to pass this out, I would like that to be included.
Okay. Can we talk about that in just one? I would love to talk about that right after we wrap this up real quick.
Oh, I
Just-
thought we were finished, I'm
Oh,
sorry.
no, that's all right.
So I just want to clarify so is that a motion to add that?
That was a motion.
Oh, okay.
So,
So we have to act on the motion.
well, if there's a second, if there's not. Yes, you have to act on the motion, there's been a motion already made, so.
Well, point of clarification. I would be happy to second it, but I would like to wrap up the gun discussion first. So,
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, I can withdraw my motion. I thought we had finished. I thought
That's all right.
testimony was done, so.
if.
And
you'll
I'll
be-
withdraw my motion
Okay.
till you,
In just a minute, yeah, and then I'll be happy to second if that's all right. Fairly appropriate, okay. So my question would be on 10.1.1A5, how do we fix this?
If you want to amend out of that section, it would simply be adding 10.1.1A5 and section 1 of the subsection A under the ordinance, because that's where we have all of the areas we're amending out of.
So we would just add it to the portion that we're amending out of.
Yes.
So the appropriate motion would be to move,
I think an appropriate motion would be to move to add the words 10.1.1A5 into line 21 after the word omitted, because that would just add another amendment to the,
okay. So it would just specifically delete 10.1.1A5 is what that will do, right?
yes, it would delete our adoption, it would delete it out of our adoption of the UPOC.
Councilman Everhart's throwing me for a curveball because I don't want to make the motion and then the meeting's over with, because I still wanna have this discussion, so what's the appropriate measure here?
Well, I think the appropriate measure would be, you could vote on the amendment that we just discussed relating to the firearms. And then I think the chair and the committee can add an agenda item at either the chair's request or a majority vote of the committee. So if you wanted to take up the domestic battery and you wanted to add that.
Well, I don't know if it's point of order or what, but it's already on the discussion. I mean, we
This is the
have
whole thing,
it's
yeah.
the whole
It's
ordinance.
the entire UPOC, you're right.
Right, so that's
So
what I
the
meant. I
motion-
wasn't out of order with
Yeah.
my motion.
No, okay, so the motion could technically
Yeah.
tie both of them together.
Or it
Yeah,
could follow.
You would have to vote on both of them together.
So if we had one vote to amend, then we can also have a second vote
Ex-
to amend.
Right,
Exactly.
Okay.
yes.
Chairing a meeting's fun. So is there a motion on the firearms issue?
Yeah, I know, so moved to omit it, add it on line 21, and that in essence removes the ban on loaded weapons in
Yeah.
vehicles.
Yes, if you add 10.1.1A5
A5.
to,
The omissions of the UPOC.
yes,
Okay.
line 21.
And is there a second? I'll second it. Is there any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes 3-0. And now we will discuss section 3.1.1, domestic battery under the UPOC. Councilwoman?
I would make a motion to remove that item as a deleted item, so which would in essence reinstate it as part of the Uniform Public Offense Code.
I'll second.
Second? Any discussion?
Why was this removed in the first place? Because of the prosecutions and,
And I would like to speak a little bit to it, and then we have the chief of police and the chief prosecution here that could address any other issues. I think that the prosecution of domestic battery is something that we should be headed towards as a municipality. However, what we've done is we've entered into discussions with the district attorney to try to get numbers of how many cases are we looking at in prosecuting. Because one of the things that I'm sensitive to is the number of resources we have right now in prosecution. And having prosecuted these cases in the past, it takes a lot of resources. I think we could do a really good job of prosecuting those cases, but I think we would be looking at hiring another prosecutor. We would need a victim witness coordinator. We would need to look at probation, because it's going to increase the number of probation officers. We would probably need to have docket time. There are some mandatory jail sentences that come along with prosecuting domestic battery, and there's victim services that have to go along with that. If you're arrested for, and I would ask that either of the chiefs can address this as well, but domestic battery is a mandatory arrest statute as far as I can recall. And then if that person is arrested and then they're held and then we prosecute it, then we pick up those jail fees. And that's what I was talking about, mandatory jail time. It's a mandatory arrest offense, that when an officer arrives on the scene and the complaint is domestic battery, as long as there's probable cause that a domestic battery occurred, somebody's going to jail.
Yeah.
And those jail fees then would then transfer to the city if we picked up that prosecution. Right now, the DA's office has picked those up. What I've discussed, just the internal discussions that I've had with the chief of prosecution, is looking at are there different types of there's different types of domestic battery, but what types of cases of domestic battery do we want to do versus the DA's office? For example, domestic battery could be a push. Somebody pushes somebody else. That's something that I think we could pick up. If it's a more violent offense that may escalate into an aggravated battery or something else, that may go to the DA's office. Now that's going to present another set of issues for the police department in terms of where they send those. It's something that I'm supportive of looking at, supportive of doing in the future, and Councilwoman Everhart and I have discussed this. I just want to be planful about how we do that to make sure that we're not overburdening our resources in prosecution.
Councilmember Hurd?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I understand that, but this was always on the books, and the city wasn't prosecuting because it was being prosecuted at the state level.
Right.
And by reinserting it, because it's part of, it should be, is, in my opinion, part of the Uniform Public Offense Code, doesn't mean we're going to start prosecuting. It could still be handled the way it was for many years, which is that the state prosecutes. And so I just, for point of clarification, it doesn't mean that because we adopt the UPOC as it is proposed with domestic battery in it, that we're automatically going to start prosecuting. I guess I would pose that question because it's not, it hasn't come to my attention that the district attorney's office has indicated that they want to discontinue prosecuting misdemeanors. That was stated when their budget was cut a few years ago, which is how this came out, which in my opinion was the wrong way to address the issue, but that was stated some years ago, but that is not his current position as I'm aware. So, I mean, I understand, and I certainly don't want the city to incur additional expense, but I don't want to immediately say, well, this just means we're gonna start prosecuting. Is that true?
The DA's office would have the option of sending those cases over to our office for prosecution at that point. It's hard to answer that question because I haven't sat down with Mr. Taylor and said what, I would like to sit down with him and say what can our plan be with these cases? So we know what those numbers look like.
And I appreciate that answer. I think that I've been waiting years to get this back in. I thought it was wrong. It was a black eye on the city. And it seems like unless I get it back into the UPOC, it's not ever gonna happen. So that's why I made the motion, and I hope people support it and that it's included.
And just for clarification, you weren't on the body at the time, but what had happened was there were budget issues at the county. The district attorney decided to stop prosecuting our misdemeanor battery cases, domestic battery cases, to save money. And so because we had the domestic battery on our code, that meant it fell back to the city. The city, speaking towards the resources that you were just talking about, didn't have the capacity to be able to prosecute those cases. So for about 30 days, there were people who were released from jail without prosecution for domestic battery. Now, the fix, which I understand the issues with it, and it does send a very bad message about our community, but the fix was to strip domestic battery charges out of our UPOC, because then it would force the district attorney to start prosecuting those cases again, which he did the very next day after we stripped it out. So the concern that I have, and I'm happy to pass it out of this body because I think that doesn't change it immediately. We can talk about it at the council meeting, and hopefully we can have some conversation with the district attorney, is that if we pass it back out again, he may just decide the next day to stop prosecuting again. And do we have the capacity to pick those cases up? And from what I'm hearing, we don't.
I can tell you that our prosecutors work very, very hard. They're always busy. They're running to court back and forth. I would be concerned. No, we don't have the capacity if Mr. Taylor would decide that they're not prosecuting those cases anymore. We do not have the capacity to prosecute all the domestic battery cases in the city.
And from my position, I understand symbolism and I understand the message that we send, but the only thing that I'm concerned about is whether or not people are protected and safe. So if individuals are being put in harm's way because their perpetrator is not being prosecuted, then we're not doing our job as community to protect them. And that's a big deal for me. I don't want to see people put in an unsafe situation just because we want to send the right message.
And if I may, Mr. Chair, and I just want to clarify, just because last time I think when this happened a few years ago, yeah, the DA's office is prosecuting these cases right now. I don't want to send the message that we're saying that they're not. The DA's office is prosecuting these people right now, that they are following the law, they are going to jail, so there's not a gap as far as I know, or I've been told.
But the DA's office is prosecuting those cases because we forced him to prosecute those cases, because there was no city code that applied, only the state statute applied.
Correct.
So that's the rationale that was there at the time when we made the change.
this happen in Wyandotte County or Wichita, Sedgwick County with, domestic battery? And I was on the domestic violence committee that put the state plan together, so I'm a little bit familiar with some of this stuff.
I can speak just to a couple of the cities and counties I've worked in Lawrence. Lawrence doesn't, the municipal court does not prosecute domestic batteries. It's all done through the county. In Franklin County, the last I worked there, I haven't looked at it in the last few days, but the state prosecuted all those cases. The city doesn't prosecute them.
So would we be one of the few cities that would be prosecuting them now?
I don't want to answer that because I haven't looked at all the cities in Kansas. It's just the 2 cities that I know of that I've worked in. It's handled with the state.
Does the chief know about Wyandotte County?
Yeah, I don't think you want me to speculate.
Okay.
I'd ask.
Well, I would like to know that information. I mean, it's, you know, it's, why reinvent the wheel if, I mean, cities are cities, and we should be looking and seeing what works in other cities.
Well, if I may, it worked in our city up until they stopped being prosecuted.
And
And then it didn't work for about 30
And that
minutes.
was the DA that,
It was his decision not to
not to
prosecute.
prosecute.
if I may,
Yeah.
the other issue to look at is we've, over the last 2 years, and Mr. Ghani can correct me if I'm wrong, that we've cut 2 prosecution positions from our prosecution staff. Since this has occurred, we cut another one this last budget season. We have one individual who does, part of her job is victim witness coordination, but she also coordinates the prosecution office. So we've eliminated staff since that has occurred as well.
The one thing I would say, I have absolutely no issue with us bringing it back in if we're capable of doing the prosecution. I have no issue paying for it. I think it's very, very important and it should be a priority to us. But I would just go back again to, I don't wanna see anyone put in a situation where their perpetrators immediately released from jail and now they're put in harm's way. I mean, that's my number one concern. So I think if we pass it out of here favorably, it gives us time to have those conversations, to figure out what the necessities are. If the DA is still of the position that he would like us to prosecute them, and that's the case, then we need to figure out how we're gonna fund that and make that work. I don't know that we have that much time between now and when it shows back up at the council, but we can at least start the conversation. So there's a motion before the body. Is there any other discussion?
I would like to see some, I mean, I know when we have ordinances and stuff, we have to have a fiscal note to it, fiscal impact, is that what it's called? So, I mean, I would definitely like to see what that's gonna be, for one thing, if we find that the DA will stop prosecuting if we adopt this, is that what you're saying, Jay?
I don't know.
You don't know?
And again, I don't want to put words in Mr. Taylor's mouth. I had not had that discussion with him. He's not indicated to me that he would stop prosecuting them. I want to stop that rumor innuendo that may come out of this right now.
I really don't feel comfortable voting for this, not knowing what, I mean, I would like Chad to have that discussion with the DA to see, I mean, I want us to be a very safe city, but I also don't want to be expending a lot of financial costs. And as long as he's prosecuting them now, everybody is safe, right? They're staying in
Yes.
jail, the
Yes.
perpetrator.
And I guess I would ask Chief Miller, as far as you know, the DA's office is prosecuting domestic battery first right now, and you're sending all the cases over to the DA's office?
Yes,
Right.
Well, they have to by state statute.
yes.
So, and reinserting this in the UPOC gives them the option whether or not to prosecute.
They have the option of sending them over to our office to prosecute.
Sounds like a lot of homework to do before we bring it to the council.
So there is a motion before the body. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Anything further to come before the body? No? All right.
Pass out the ordinance.
Pass out which one? Do I have to pass?
We haven't passed the ordinance, that was just an amendment.
Oh,
You wanna pass the ordinance out
Out
of
of
committee to
committee.
the body?
favorably as amended, okay, yeah.
Okay.
Is there a motion as such?
Move.
So moved.
Second.
Seconded? Okay. All those, the motion being before us is passing out the ordinance as amended favorably to the governing body. All those, is there any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes 3-0. Anything further to come before the body? Then we are adjourned. Happy Friday.